Welcome to YG One-on-One, sponsored by Right Now Media at Work, Flex Scripts, and C12. On YG TV, we bring action-oriented entrepreneurs and free thinkers to the stage so we can be inspired, informed, and better understand how we can grow by breaking the rules of business. This show is a long-form sit-down with a CEO, business leader, or luminary to learn how they got there and what they can teach us. For more content shaking up the business industry, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hi everybody, very excited to announce that today my guest is Kimberly Kane, President and CEO of Kane Communications Group. Kimberly, wonderful to have you on our blue chair today.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here. I'll sit on any colored chair, any chair. It's great to be sitting down, actually. So many of us are so busy, we're just running all the time.
Absolutely. I don't know about you, but I've already gone through 3 pairs of shoes. I'm running so fast.
All right. I believe it.
Well, one of the things that I'm very excited about, so in our conversation today, we're going to talk about a hot button issue for me and a hot button issue for a number of business executives, and that's communication, the importance of communication, what makes a good communicator, and I know you basically wrote the book on effective communication, so I'm very excited to learn from you here today. But let's start from square one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Where did your passion for communication come from? I mean, obviously you're a humble person, which I love about you, but you are a known commodity. You're a very successful professional. Where did all that passion for what you do come from?
You know, I think it really comes from my upbringing, my father. My dad was a phenomenal communicator, I think one of the best. And he was a real inspiration to myself and to my twin sister. And when I was young, he used to tell me, when you grow up, you're going to be a journalist. The way that you ask questions, the way that you tell stories, the way that you communicate with kids on the block. He said, I just see that as your future. And so I don't know if it was kind of that as the inspiration for me, or if it was really just me kind of finding myself and growing into that. Mm-hmm. But I think, you know, when you take a look at the world around us today, you look at the powerful role that communications plays, not just in achieving headlines or marketing campaigns, but changing perception, inspiring people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I enjoy the most about communication.
We're just getting started. Let's take a quick break and come back for more with Kimberly Kane, President and CEO at Kane Communications Group, in just a moment. This episode of YG One-on-One on YG TV is brought to you by Right Now Media at Work, Flex Scripts, and C12.
Welcome to Right Now Media at Work, an on-demand library of video resources used by Christian business leaders to care for employees, inspire leaders, and cultivate a healthy team. Serve your employees with over 20,000 videos on topics like professional development, mental health, and leadership from leaders like Patrick Lencioni, Henry Cloud, and John Maxwell, plus marriage, parenting, and personal finance content. Help your employees become better at home and better at work. Schedule a free demo today to get an in-depth tour of Right Now Media at Work.
If you're a CEO, listen up. Odds are you're paying too much for your employee benefit pharmacy spend. How do I know? I work with Flex Scripts. They're the PBM police, delivering their average client 15 to 20% savings on their pharmacy benefits. Think how much money that is. Flex Scripts makes sure your PBM keeps their promises and meets your guarantees. And if they don't, Flex Scripts holds them accountable and gets you what you deserve. Stop paying too much for your pharmacy benefits. Get Flex Scripts, the PBM police, on your side. Start the conversation today at flexscripts.com. That's flexscripts.com. On YG TV, we talk about being a strong leader, being focused and pushing the envelope. Many of you are hard chargers, but truth be told, we all could use a sounding board and some accountability along the way. Through a peer group format, the C12 Group gathers a dedicated group of leaders who want bigger, better businesses and share your Christian values. The C12 Group is the largest and fastest growing faith-based business peer advisory group in the world, and they are now expanding right here in the Milwaukee area. If you're a CEO or business owner and want to find out if you qualify for one of these groups, contact my friend Chris Wise at 920-969-8070 or go to c12group.com, the letter C, 12group.com. The C12 Group, building great businesses for a greater purpose. So what made you want to start Kane Communications Group? I mean, did you always know you wanted to run this business, or what were the circumstances that led to the creation of this organization?
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to my dad for just a minute. And I mean, he was really the root of the reason I went into journalism in the first place. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and he ran a gang prevention program. And he often talked during my childhood about, what amazing results he was achieving, as a leader of a gang prevention program. Young people that people didn't have a lot of faith in. They saw these kids as individuals who would grow up and cause problems. And his program set records at doing the exact opposite, helping these kids stay in school, helping them achieve amazing outcomes, helping them go on to college and on to jobs. And his one frustration, throughout so much of my life was actually the media. And he would say to me, why don't we have more journalists who are telling great stories about the work that we're doing, who are showing the great kind of progression of these young people? And that led me into the world of journalism, to be a storyteller, to try to close that gap and help people see that maybe there are problems in the world, but there are some really good people out there who are solving those problems. So I pursued a career in journalism, loved it. Ultimately, I decided that I wanted to be a mom, had 4 children, and working as a full-time journalist and being a very involved mom didn't go hand in hand. I had 3 young boys, and I really felt that those young boys needed their mom in their lives. So I left TV news, I went into the business world, and then I started Kane Communications Group.
Okay. Well, and now I think when a lot of people see you, they see the success of your business, a lot of the information that you share out there, social media or otherwise, they see a very successful person. But I think behind the scenes, I think part of the way that we grow personally and professionally is through failure. So what would you say, when you look back on the arc of your career, what would you say was the biggest failure that you had, and what did you learn from that? How did that help make you the person that you are today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I've thought a lot about that, Paul. I think, my biggest failure was leaving journalism. So being a TV news reporter and telling those stories to, the audiences that I was telling those stories to was, that was my dream job. And leaving that dream job was agonizing for me. So I think there was a lot more I could have accomplished in the world of journalism. But I also see, to your point, those failures as opportunities to learn. So, the decision to leave TV news meant I was not going to be a successful journalist anymore, but it also meant that I was going to be able to embark on a new career, on a new world. And there were so many lessons I learned as a journalist that I have now taken with me into my work today in public relations and strategic communications. Kane would not be as successful as we are today if it weren't for some of those tough lessons that I learned as a journalist.
Yeah. So where does your drive come from? Where does your ambition come from? What fuels you? To take some of the risks that you do, to put yourself out there like you do, knowing that not everything is guaranteed to work. Where does that drive come from?
I think I've always been a problem solver. I don't remember this moment in my life, but my mom told me about it time and again while I was growing up. I think it was 3 or 4 years old, and she was really frustrated about the vacuum cleaner at home not working. And she couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. And sure enough, little 3 or 4-year-old Kimberly figures out how to take the vacuum cleaner apart because I wanted to put it back together so my mom had a vacuum cleaner that worked. And I think that's what's driven me throughout my life, is if there's a problem that needs to be solved, sometimes you look around you, Paul, and you see other people saying, yeah, that's a problem. And then they put their heads down and they go away and they figure it's somebody else's problem to solve, right? And I don't subscribe to that. I think that we all need to be part of solving problems. And that's really what drives me.
So we talk about you growing up and the influence of your parents, the influence of your father, some of the things that you just mentioned. Obviously, you were taught from an early age that communication was important. It kind of really puts you on this trajectory that you're on professionally. How optimistic or pessimistic are you about our future leaders, our young people? Are they developing the necessary communication skills? Do you feel that they have resources at their disposal to be effective communicators as they grow up, or are you a little worried in that regard?
So I am eternally a glass half full person. So I'm always optimistic. I think young people today, I mean, those of us who are parents, those of us who are around young people, I'm so impressed with the breadth of their knowledge. Social media has a lot to do with that, right? And that has its pluses and its minuses. So I have a lot of faith that our young people are actually growing up pretty astute, pretty aware of the world around them today. Here's where I worry, though, is I think a lot of people are stressed today, especially right now. What's happening with COVID-19, what's happening with our economy. And I worry that without some boundaries, young people who are accessing social media, young people who are spending a lot of time, talking with their friends on FaceTime and that sort, without some boundaries, I think we're not giving kids the context for what they're learning on social media and for how they're communicating on social media. So I'm faithful that we're raising a generation of young people who is much more well-rounded than maybe we were when we were growing up. I just hope that there's context that can continue to be added into their lives so that what they're learning and how they're engaging is meaningful.
Sure. Describe to me, if you can, a little bit about the Kane Communications Group differentiator. I mean, there's a number of different organizations in your space. There's a number of professionals that, to some degree, do what you do, provide the services that you provide. What makes your group unique? What allows your group to stand out amongst the others that play in your space?
Yeah. I think there are a few things that allow us to stand out. And I'll come back to my roots as a journalist. So I loved working with folks in the public relations space when I was a journalist. And I loved it when folks who were in PR were candid with me about what success looked like for them. Like, I need to have 20 stories this year focused on heart disease. Okay, I get it. I know that you need to pitch stories to me about heart disease, and we can have then an open, transparent relationship. So if it fits into my schedule, I'll get to do a story on heart disease, or a few of them perhaps with you this year. As we work with clients today who come to us with public relations and with marketing needs, I often find that kind of transparency is not there. They come, they want a headline, or they want a marketing campaign, but the why behind it, what's the problem we need to solve, what does success look like, isn't usually there when we begin working together. So as a strategic public relations firm, what we do is we get to ask those tough questions at the front end. When we begin working with a client, we want to do more than help them achieve headlines. We want to help them achieve outcomes. We want to help them solve business problems. So we generally push back in the front and we say, well, let's get really clear on what the problem is that we need to solve and what success looks like out of a public relations or a marketing campaign. And that creates a really valuable relationship for us on the front end with our clients, because they understand that we're not just here again to help them achieve headlines, we're here to help them achieve some pretty significant business outcomes. That makes us different than a lot of public relations and marketing firms who often say, well, we don't have a seat at the table. Why doesn't PR have a seat at the table? Well, it's because you need to start asking those tough business questions on the front end so that you're aligning with where your client is going with their business.
Well, one of the things that, and you and I have chatted about at length, is entrepreneurship, just seeing what a lot of what individuals are doing, what they're creating, some of these really exciting things. And I'm guilty of it from time to time. I'm an ambitious guy, and sometimes it's, well, how do I get that next promotion? How do I continue to rise through the ranks? And I think sometimes these C-suite executives are so eager and excited to land that position that maybe they don't stop to ask themselves, am I ready? Am I well-rounded enough? So as you start seeing these individuals achieve presidency titles, CEO titles, basically decision-making authority, are you finding that they're ready from a communication perspective for that responsibility more often than not? And if not, what do you think is one of the biggest issues that are lacking for people in leadership positions with respect to communication?
Yeah. Well, Paula, as you get to the top of a company, I think there's a level of vulnerability that you experience. As you are climbing up the ranks, you might have colleagues and coworkers around you that can be sounding boards for you. But when you do get up to the very top, I find many CEOs aren't really prepared for that. It's lonely at the top concept. Who do I have to speak with? And what risks can I take as a communicator? I think many of them find that they can default more easily to speaking in facts versus speaking from their heart. And I think that there's a good variety in terms of those who are ready for that position and from a communication standpoint, and maybe those who have some learning to do. But the ones that I find that are the most successful are the ones who are willing to admit they don't know it all, they don't have it all, and they do need to develop a group of counselors or sounding boards around them who can help be their conscience, who can help them think through things. And communications is a really important part of that.
Do you think that enough people in executive leadership positions make themselves vulnerable, to your point? And if not, if somebody says, boy, that was just a very insightful thing that Kimberly just said, starting tomorrow I'm going to make myself more vulnerable. Where do you start? How does one start a process like that, would you say?
Yeah, I think we have a long way to go in that respect, that ability to be vulnerable. I think a modern day leader is a leader who is willing to be vulnerable and speak from their heart. One who can empathize through communications, empathize in the decisions that they're making, not just use logic and data to make those decisions. I think logic and data are very important foundations, but as you know, especially when you're communicating during a crisis, people don't make decisions based on information. They make decisions based on how you make them feel. And I think that leaders do need to work on that. And what is the process for that? I think part of the process is making sure we're taking care of ourselves. I think leaders are often on the treadmill, right? You and I talked about that a few moments ago. I think you need to give yourself time to breathe, time to think.
Yeah. Well, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, just because you've been around for a while, you're so well connected. I mean, you've got tentacles and C-suites all over the place, rightfully so, because you've earned that ability. But for me, and we've had this conversation before, I mean, I'm pretty open about my struggles with anxiety, depression, occasionally suicidal thoughts back when I was in college. And I think you're right. I mean, this world tells you you need to act a certain way, you need to be a certain way, never let them see you sweat, never let them see you cry. Speaking only for myself, it's been extremely therapeutic, if nothing else, to let people know I don't have everything put together. I've struggled as well. But if I'm in a high-profile position, if I'm an international public speaker, if I'm running an organization like yours, to keep that all bottled up all day and always put on an act or wear a mask can be tough. Would you also agree that not only is it nice to make yourself vulnerable from a leadership perspective, but would you also agree that it's therapeutic in some way, shape, or form for a leader to do that for their own personal well-being?
Absolutely. I think there's a huge weight that comes off your shoulders when you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not, when you don't have to stretch yourself into a role or into a mindset that isn't authentic for you. The studies, the research that's coming out today really indicate that people all over the world are watching leaders and watching brands more closely than ever. And we're evaluating you, Paul, or me, Kimberly, based not just on our title or based not just on how successful our company is, but based on what we stand for as human beings and what we stand for as citizens. And I think when leaders can let go of having to be someone that they're not and can step into being that authentic self, you build much closer relationships with your employees, with your customers, with your stakeholders, and being who you naturally are, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think I'd be interested in your take on this. Social media, especially LinkedIn, I mean, it's a good platform for getting your name out there. It's a good platform for building connections. I believe LinkedIn is one of the greatest monetization platforms out there currently. I see a lot of organizations and businesses that are all over LinkedIn, talking about their company, talking about their culture, talking about their institution. But sometimes the leaders of those organizations are behind the scenes I don't see a LinkedIn profile for you. I don't see a social media presence for you. Is that a missed opportunity, do you believe? Would you like to see C-suite executives more out in front with respect to personal branding, and if so, why?
I think it is a missed opportunity. People relate to people. They don't relate to things or to companies. I think if you have a great brand as a company that people can relate to, that's critical. But people are going to look behind the scenes at what your leaders stand for. Are they authentic, and are they aligned with your company's brand? And if there's a disconnect or a dissonance, people immediately lose faith and they lose trust. So I think it's equally important for leaders to develop their own executive brands as it is for companies to develop their brands. And again, Paul, those brands have to be authentic. They have to be based on what you stand for. They have to be something you can live and you can activate. But leaders who don't have them are at risk. I'm working with a leader today, and he calls himself a dinosaur. So he's a leader of a large organization. He's been in the middle of a crisis. And as my team has come in to begin to build out a communications infrastructure and build out a communications plan, part of that means we have to connect this organization and its leader to the people who rely on them. And it's very uncomfortable for this leader. We'll get there. It's going to take some time. But you know, the complaints or the criticisms that have come against that leader is that people can't relate to him. And if you can't relate to them, to a leader, it's really hard for that leader to get things done.
Yeah, so kind of sticking with that theme a little bit, being on the personal side or the professional side, one of the things that I've been amazed by, especially since I've gotten into the world of entrepreneurship and I've started building businesses myself, is your reputation. If you've got a great reputation, I mean, business is just lining up for you. If you've got a lousy reputation, oh my goodness, I mean, talk about making it triply hard to try to line something up. So you spend your whole life building a reputation and it could be gone in an instant. I know you're skilled in the art of reputation management. What does reputation management mean to you? And how can C-suite executives, business executives ensure that they're managing their reputation effectively?
Yeah. So reputation management is really a new art and science, I think, in the world of communications. So we tend to think of communications as something that's tactical. But when you take a look at how people make decisions, buying decisions, loyalty decisions, those are all based on what your promise is, your brand's promise or a leader's promise. And I'll tell you, Paul, I don't think many people think about their personal reputations. I don't think many people do what you do and really think about what they stand for, what their values are, and how they live those. Because if you do really begin to invest in building your reputation, it's going to be much less likely that that reputation is going to fall, or that if there is a crisis, that you'll be significantly hurt. I'll just share an example of a company, and then I'll share an example of an individual. So Nike, for example, has spent so much time and obviously a lot of money in building its reputation. And even when they launch controversial campaigns, their reputation doesn't change. Their stock price might take a hit for a little while, but their consumers know what Nike stands for, they believe in that Nike brand, and they come back gangbusters. You look at someone like Bill Gates, for example, and look at the reputation that he has built around the world as not just an entrepreneur and an innovator, but as a philanthropist. And people will tune in to listen to what he has to say. So those are two examples of an individual and a company who have invested in their reputations. Where we get pulled in quite often is to work with CEOs and companies who have not taken their reputation seriously, and they have seen their brand more as a logo or a tagline than something that they actually stand for or their promise. And today, with social media, investing in building that brand and reputation is more important than ever.
Well, let's go with that then. So it'd be nice if all of our organizations were like Nike. It'd be nice if all of us were like Bill Gates, I mean, for a number of different reasons. Let's say you've got a smaller organization, a family-owned business with 25 employees, certainly not a Nike, and this person is not a Bill Gates. And with the explosion of social media, that they're posting a lot of stuff. They're communicating with their constituents and whatever else. And I think you would agree that one of the dark sides of social media is you have a lot of anonymous attacks,
Right.
be it on Twitter, be it Facebook, be it LinkedIn, whatever. Imagine there's an executive of this 25-person family-owned business and they're getting attacked. Somebody's calling their reputation into question. Maybe it's a smear campaign or whatever else. What should that leadership team, what should that executive start doing immediately to try to stem the bleeding before it gets too bad?
Yeah. Well, I think before that happens, even if you are a small company or even an individual, before you start posting on social media, you want to think about what you stand for. And if you're posting a lot of different things, and oftentimes I see businesses do this, you know, they'll post about 5 different topics in a day, but none of them, you know, are related to each other. So you're creating a bit of dissonance out there. But if you are creating a series of posts and you're using LinkedIn strategically, and you're using Facebook strategically, and you're using Twitter strategically, you're starting to build out a story of who you are and what you stand for. If you do begin to get attacked on social media, that story or that reputation that you have begun to build out often can serve as a buffer for you. I think it's important to use another tool in social media today called social listening. So as you are pushing out communications or you're engaging people through your social media, today it's really important for companies to have their ear to the ground. And even small companies can do this. There are Google Alerts, or there are other options on social media where you can really listen to what people are saying about you. You can listen to what they're saying about your product or the industry that you're in. And you can begin to pick up some of the chatter that may represent a risk to you. There could be something in your supply chain that's a risk. So I think listening to that chatter, having your ear to the ground is important. And that can also help you identify who some of these individuals are that might attack you. And we had an engagement with a hospital a couple of years ago that was in the middle of an acquisition. And there was an article that was written, an op-ed that was written in the local paper disparaging them. And that set off a firestorm of attacks against this hospital on social media. Using social listening, we were actually able to identify who some of those attackers were. We were able to share their name with the hospital's CEO. That CEO actually contacted those individuals and had frank conversations with them. And after that, the attack stopped.
In a situation like that, do you typically have a time window? Like, for instance, if we don't respond within a week, if we don't nip this in the bud within 30 days, we run the risk of this spiraling out of control and being really bad for our organization. In your work, have you seen something like that where you've got a certain amount of time to address this before you potentially lose control of the situation?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the attack. I think that there are some people who are just, in fact, I was having a conversation with someone about this just yesterday. They're just bad actors, and they are going to attack you on social media. And for the most case, those kinds of attacks don't warrant a response. You don't want to engage with somebody who's not interested in learning. Occasionally, you'll have a customer who attacks you on social media because of poor customer service or because your product malfunctioned. And that's a really important time for you to engage in a thoughtful way on social media with that individual, and then immediately find a way to get a face-to-face conversation or a phone conversation with them. So you want to use key messaging to engage with them on social media, demonstrate you're really a great organization or a great person, see if you can take that conversation offline and solve that problem.
Yeah, so in the leadership ranks anyway, people come from all different backgrounds, all different skill sets, all different strengths and abilities. Some people are better communicators than not. I'm sure you would have seen that in your day for sure. If you were to say, and I know there could be a bunch of variables, but all great communicators have these two things in common. What would those two things be and why?
Yeah. Authenticity. So they're willing to speak from an authentic position and from their hearts even. And brevity as well. So authenticity connects you with the people, connects you with your target audience, so that what you're saying seems sincere. You know, remember, people make decisions not based on information, but based on emotion. Brevity is so important because we are able to captivate someone for so long. And if we overstate the same points or we go into too many different analogies, we'll lose them. So make your point. We call it sound bites in TV news, right? Speak succinctly.
What do you think are some of the biggest threats that face the leadership community today, be it communication or otherwise? Obviously, communication is your forte, it's your bread and butter, you're one of the best at that field in particular, but you're also a leader. So when it comes to the leadership community today, what would you say are the biggest threats we face as leaders?
Yeah. I think that there are a few threats that people face as leaders. I think it's so important for leaders to surround themselves with people, not who always agree with them, but people who will push back on them. I think really good leaders recognize that they're not always right and that they don't always have the answers. And to be well-rounded leaders, you have to have people who have your back, but they provide that objective counsel. And I don't find a lot of leaders who do that. So I think that's one of the most important things for leaders to do. I'll go back to that concept of authenticity, Paul. I think there are so many expectations on leaders today. This year alone, the number of companies that have gone bankrupt, the number of companies that have had to let employees go, the pressure that's been put on government to help support people who are in really difficult positions. It's significant. And I think, again, if we're just trying to hit people over the head with information, we're not going to connect with them. So I think leaders have to be willing to be vulnerable, despite the pressure that's on leaders today. You have to be willing to go there and speak authentically with the people who really rely on you.
How personally have you overcome adversity in your life? And again, I mean this with all due sincerity,
Sure,
but,
yeah.
but you're a successful person, you're very well known in a lot of circles, and some people might say, gosh, life would be easy if I was Kimberly Kane. I think you and I both know that. Obviously, you've had your share of struggles as well, too, to get to where you are. So personally, how have you overcome adversity in your life? Are there lessons that other leaders could learn from that? What specifically would you respond with in that regard?
Yeah, boy, there's so many adversities that I've had to overcome. And I think, I don't quit. I never quit is part of it. And I don't question myself. So I think when people cause you to question yourself, and when you really do begin to question yourself, I think that's when you begin to spiral and lose control. And so, you asked me about the beginning of Kane Communications Group. I had left a wonderful job in corporate communications. I was traveling around the country, and once again, I found myself not being able to be there for those 4 little ones that I really wanted to be able to spend time with. And I left my job to become a consultant. And that was a really difficult time in my life because I didn't know what direction I was going in. I was a single mom of 4 at that time. Everything was on my shoulders. And it was a really humbling time. It was a challenging time. The first time in my life I didn't have a direction that I knew I was going in. But I had 4 little people I knew were depending on me. I couldn't quit. And I spent $100 out of my checking account to open Kane Communications Group. And I had a really good relationship with a CFO who contacted me and said, Kimberly, I think we have a little communications problem we could use your help with. That was the beginning of Kane. And for the first 5 years of our business, we doubled in revenue every year. We grew so quickly. So overcoming adversity to me has meant I got to believe in myself and I can't quit.
Now this next question I'm asking for a friend, but you had said don't question yourself. With all due respect, easier said than done. And that's one of the things that I struggle with, I'll be brutally honest, is sometimes that doubt creeps in. You're not good enough. You're not talented enough. You're not worthy of something like this. And sometimes that doubt, if you let it take hold in your brain, can just have crippling, paralyzing effects on you. Were you always of the mindset that you don't doubt or question yourself? Or was there a moment or two where you learned, hey, you know what? I've got great ideas. Hey, you know what? When I set my mind to something, it works. How did that light switch for you specifically?
Yeah. Someone asked me once, Kimberly, how do you do it all? You run a company, you have 4 children, how do you do it all? And I flippantly said, denial. And they laughed. And I thought to myself for a moment, well, it's actually true. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of feelings, a lot of thoughts I completely shut off because I don't have time for them. And I think when you think about that concept of questioning yourself, I remember after my father died, sitting in my closet and crying, lost it, tears, crying. I'd lost my mom a few years before. I'd lost my grandparents a few years before that. I was a young mom and I had no parents anymore. And I felt hopeless and helpless. But that cry for me was so therapeutic and cathartic because I realized raising these children was on my shoulders. Being a successful professional was on my shoulders. And I didn't have time or room in my life to question myself. I just had to go. And when you think about questioning yourself, Paul, who makes you question yourself? Are they worth it? Should they make you question yourself? And usually the answer is no, they should never make me question myself. And yes, I do believe that I'm capable of doing whatever I need to do. And I think when you can get to that place, I think you can be unstoppable.
What would you, at the end of the day, what would you like Kimberly Kane's legacy to be? You've been doing a lot of good up to this point. I think you're just getting started. There's still a lot of chapters in your book that haven't been written yet. In the final analysis, what would you really like Kimberly Kane's legacy to be?
Yeah. Well, we're building it right now. And I think there are a few legacies that I would like to see in maybe my rearview mirror. One of them is helping companies recognize that communications is not a tactic that you think about 3 steps down the line. Communications has got to be part of your business strategy. And I think if we can get companies to begin to think that way, we have a business plan we're putting together, we need to have strategic communications as part of that. That's a huge win for me. The other thing is building a company that is a great corporate citizen from the very beginning. No matter how small you are, I think being able to demonstrate that we can build companies that are connected to our communities, that give back to our communities, that elevate our employees not just as part of the business, but as members of the community is also, I think, a legacy and something that I would like people to recognize Kane as a company that stands for that.
For individuals that might be interested in getting a better picture of who you might have in your mind, I mean, you've described who you think are pretty effective communicators from a leadership position, individuals that are vulnerable, individuals that are authentic, that are really kind of proactive, figuring out who am I, what do I stand for, so to speak. Could you give our audience an example or two of maybe who you think are effective communicators from a leadership position in case they wanted to learn a little bit more about them and possibly emulate them to some degree?
Sure. I'll go back in history to Winston Churchill or Martin Luther King. These are people who stood during very difficult times and they spoke authentically to large groups of people and they made change happen. Those are 2 individuals who I think are, phenomenal leaders and communicators. I think here, if you look in your own backyard here in Milwaukee, there are so many examples of people who are great communicators and good leaders as well. I'll go to Marty Brooks, who's the CEO of Wisconsin Center District. Marty came into Milwaukee just a few years ago to run an organization, help it grow, help it expand. And when we first started working with Marty, we talked about how important communications was to him. And you see Marty out there speaking to his employees and speaking to stakeholders authentically from his heart. He's not afraid to share difficult information and really kind of live the brand of the leader that he needs to be for that organization. I think Tom Baird is a great communicator. Tim Sheehy are great communicators. They're people who are willing to get out there. They take risks, but they live what they say. And I think those are some things that are very important about good communicators.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, speaking on behalf of a lot of individuals in the business community, I'm glad you took the risk in starting Kane Communications Group. I'm glad that you took the risk in starting to share your passion and your love for communication with others. I personally have benefited from your words of wisdom, not just today, in the past. I know countless others have as well. So thank you for joining us on YG One-on-One. It was wonderful to have you, and appreciate the conversation here today.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
Thanks to Kimberly for sitting down on YG One-on-One, sponsored by Right Now Media at Work, FlexScripts, and C12. We want to feature the CEOs and executives that inspire you. Let us know who you'd like to see by connecting with us on our website or via social media. And make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single episode of YGTV. I'm your host, Paul M. Neuberger, CEO of the Young Guns Movement. See you next time.